Welcome back to episode 4 of the Origin of My Faith series, where today we are going to take a look at some non-Christian sources documenting the life of Jesus that help us, one, they help us establish his existence, and two, they tell us a little bit about that existence. We're going to learn some important things today, so please enjoy. Let's get into part 2. This is God as Man, the historical evidence of Christ. So my belief that Jesus is God in human form comes primarily from historical evidence. Jesus Christ of Nazareth is one of the most well-documented human beings to have ever walked the earth. In fact, there is more evidence that Jesus existed than there is that you or I exist, and that will be especially true 2,000 years from now. Some like Jewish and Roman scribes from the time called him a great teacher. Josephus is a first century Jewish historian who wrote the following in Book 18, sections 63 and 64 of his work, Antiquities of the Jews. He says, "About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. For he was one who performed surprising deeds and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Messiah. And when, upon the accusation of the principal men among us, Pilate had him condemned to a cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a third day restored to life, for the prophets of God had foretold these things and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared." Now, this verse gives us the verse. It's not a Bible verse. This excerpt from a Jewish historian gives us the basis to start looking at Jesus as a human being who actually existed, and it tells us some things about that individual's existence. However, there's an asterisk here because unfortunately there's a problem with this translation. Josephus was Jewish, and he is widely believed to have never converted to Christianity, and so there are things in this passage that kind of contradict the ideology of what somebody like that would actually say. It says, if indeed one ought to call him a man, and he was the Messiah, and it affirms his resurrection on the third day, when if you were Jewish at the time, you would never say something like that. And so there's a lot of questions surrounding this translation and its validity because Josephus wouldn't say that. This inconsistency has led a lot of people to question the authenticity of what is widely viewed as the most important and reliable non-Christian evidence for Jesus' existence. Luckily for us, the Hebrew University in Jerusalem has cited a 10th century Arabic manuscript of Josephus, of this excerpt of his, that contains a translation of what is much more likely for Josephus to have said. And I'm going to read that to you now. It goes like, "At this time, there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. And many people from among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, and those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion, and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders." So as you can see, this translation doesn't contain the ideological contradictions with who Josephus was and what he probably believed about Jesus, but it does tell us how he was seen as a historical figure by people who did not believe in his divinity. So this does tell us a few things, which we'll get to here in a second. As I said, he wasn't a Christian, but he does cite Jesus as having existed, having been a wise teacher, as having been crucified under Pontius Pilate. That there were at least reports of him appearing to his disciples after being crucified. That many of his followers believed he was the Messiah that the Old Testament prophets had foretold. And the one I find to be the most telling is that his disciples did not abandon their discipleship after his crucifixion. And we're going to get a lot more into even this next excerpt that I'm going to read here. We're going to get a lot more into Christians not backing down in the face of persecution, and why that is evidence that points toward the historical reliability of Jesus. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves there. So I would like to give you guys one more, the reason I'm giving you non-Christian sources here is because I would like to establish the existence of Jesus as a teacher, as a person that actually walked the earth, because some people think he's just a fairy tale like Santa Claus, and that's a little bit ridiculous. But I'd like to give you non-Christian, biased sources here so that we can establish a foundation to begin looking at him as a historical figure. So another one of those comes from Roman historian Tacitus. Tacitus wrote the following about Jesus in Book 15, Section 24 of his work, Annals of Imperial Rome, when he was talking about Emperor Nero blaming the Christians for the fire of Rome. Hence, to suppress the rumor, he falsely charged with guilt and punished Christians who were hated for their enormities. Christus, the founder of the name, was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea, in the reign of Tiberius. But the pernicious superstition, repressed for a time, broke out again, not only through Judea, where the mischief originated, but through the city of Rome also, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world and their center become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city as of hatred against mankind. And so here is yet another non-Christian source referencing Jesus, his crucifixion by Pontius Pilate, and a little bit of early church history talking about the persecution Christians faced in the Roman Empire, the fact that they did not back down from that persecution. And, some people have questioned the authenticity of this passage, as all historical documents have their authenticity questioned. But the fact that this excerpt appears in every known copy of Annals of Imperial Rome, and the credibility of Tacitus as a historian, and the very heavy anti-Christian rhetoric that this is written with, make it very unlikely that it is a forgery of any kind. I mean, you look at the way that this excerpt describes Christians as Christianity being mischief, and that it falls under the category of all things shameful and hideous, make it very unlikely that this was written by anybody other than the Roman historian Tacitus. And so Annals of Imperial Rome in and of itself is one of the most widely referenced sources of information for the history of Rome during this time period. And so this excerpt is believed to be very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very reliable. And so together, these excerpts from Josephus and Tacitus tell us 6 very important things, okay? 1, Jesus Christ of Nazareth existed. He was a real person that walked the earth. There are there are no reliable historians, atheist or Christian or anything, that say Jesus wasn't even a real person. 2, that Jesus Christ was a wise teacher. 3, that many people followed him. He had a lot of followers. while he was alive. And 4, many people called him the Christ, right? Many of those people that followed him believed him to be the Messiah. 5, he was crucified by Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. So this gives us a timing and a date and affirms the events of the crucifixion as having happened. And 6, that there are at least claims that people saw him after this crucifixion. And so next here, now that we've established that, I would like to take a look at the Gospels and try to answer the question, are they reliable historical documents? And if you want the answer to that question, tune in tomorrow where we are going to establish the historical reliability of the Gospels that tell us the story of Jesus' life. Thank you very much for watching episode 4, and I will see you tomorrow. God bless.